Hi, it's Anna Mason here. If you like painting flowers, it's likely that you've wanted to paint something like this gorgeous bright orange poppy with its papery looking creased petals. There's a lot of detail to capture in those petals, and the challenge is getting a balance between painting in that detail and also using the paint to achieve the 3D form of the petals themselves. Let me show you how I tackled it. I used a photo as my reference and flipped my paper around to make it easier to paint. I began with a really detailed drawing, adding in some of the darkest creases in the petals with my pencil. After adding a few pale colours to the flower centre, I used a super watery orange wash to lay down across the petals, trying to match the very lightest tones that I could see in those petals, and using a small brush to carefully go around the detailed centre of the flower. Once that was dry, I applied the darkest tones within the petals using thick red paint and a small brush so that I could create neat lines. I then added more orange to the mix to lighten it a fraction and worked on painting in the next darkest creases and darker patches of colour, feathering the edges of those darker shapes with my brush wherever a fairly smooth transition into lighter colours around would be needed. By this stage, I've established the upper and lower limits of the petal's tonal range, which means it looks way too high contrast at this stage, but actually makes it a lot easier to now go in and work on the mid-tones. I began with the darker mid-tones, concentrating on where they meet up with the darkest tones I'd just painted. The mix is more watery to create a slightly lighter colour, and I apply it with a larger brush, working over and into the transitions into the darkest tones, which have now totally dried off. Then I applied it further out into new lines and shapes which are this dark in tone. It's all these detailed line markings which give the papery effect to the petals. But of course the contrast levels at this point are way too strong, and we need to tackle that by working on the lighter mid-tones. I watered the mix down to lighten it and also added some yellow paint which had the effect of lightening it more as well as giving it a more yellow glow. I applied this everywhere this colour or darker, holding off from any areas I thought might be lighter and creating the angular shapes I could see in the reference photo as I painted. Once that was dry, I used another layer of the same mix to concentrate on the transitions into the darker tone areas, to smooth them and make them more graduated. Already by this stage the petals are starting to take some 3D form, and with all this mid-tone work complete, I could now tell that the lightest tones I'd painted initially were too light in all but a few places. So next I used a bigger brush and worked on the lightest tones again with a watery orange wash. With the layers underneath dry, I could apply this on top of the papery line markings I'd made without losing those markings underneath. Once that layer had dried, I could now tell that my darkest tones needed darkening some more to be brought back in balance, so I began my first round of tonal adjustments, using a small brush to add another layer to the darkest tone areas, and then another layer to the darker mid-tones again. I then added more yellow to my watery mix to add another layer to the mid-tones to darken them and also correct the colour here. With that dry, I added extra line details with a smaller brush to increase the papery effects. After darkening the flower centre, it was more obvious that the petals needed more unifying, so I again used a more yellow-orange, fairly watery mix to apply with a bigger brush over larger areas of the lighter tones within the petals, wherever I felt that they should be darker, being gentle with my brush so as not to interfere with the line details I'd painted underneath. This had the effect of solidifying the petals. Then finally, once that had dried off, I added a few more line details with the small brush to make sure the creased, crinkled petal effects looked spot on. A full step-by-step tutorial of this papery orange poppy is available now in my online school. If you've enjoyed this tip video, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I'd love it if you'd share this video with your friends. And if you'd like to take one of my tried and tested step-by-step tutorials for free, hop on over to animasonart.com where you'll find even more resources to help you pick up your brush and paint the way you've always wanted to. Remember, you won't improve your painting unless you make the time to paint, so be sure to schedule in some me time this week and paint something you love. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon with another tip for creating watercolours with wow. My book, The Modern Flower Painter, is available now in French, Italian, Chinese, Russian, Czech, and of course English. So hopefully there's an edition for you.